You see, something's going to happen.
What? What's going to happen?
Something wonderful.
What?
I understand how you feel. You see, it's all very clear to me now.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. In this episode, I got my man back, Absidarian Mott, and we're going to be talking about someone that I've been wanting to cover for actually a long time. I kind of wanted to do it myself, but I figured it would make sense to have other people do it that probably know more about it than I do. So we got my boy Absidarian Matt. He had hit me up, wanted to talk about Rudolf Steiner. Plus, I mean, he's got plenty of other topics, but this was one of them. So I was like, yo, let's do this one. So we got him on today with us, and joining me to co-host, I got Jin the Ninja, I got Ethan Indigo, and I got Robbie Marks. Real quick, Jin, let everybody know where they can find all your amazing work at, please, sir.
Sure. Thank you so much, Nick. So you can find me Apple and Spotify at Threshold Saints, on Twitter at Threshold Saints, as well as at Wukong Reborn, which is my primary handle, as well as on IG at Threshold Saints. And so I just want to shout out that Nick's episode just dropped, Mr. 33, episode number 33. And then today, or yesterday, on Chinese New Year, Year of the Snake, I dropped my 37th episode, so a little chronopoesis, mixing times together. So I dropped which is my Tracy Twyman final, part 5 of 5. Tracy Twyman episode, Hyperspace Kingdom. So if people want to check that out, there's 2 great episodes that are brand new.
Definitely go check out that Tracy Twyman. Definitely. And my man Ethan. What is up, Ethan? Let everybody know where they can find all your work as well, sir, please.
I am honored to be here with you guys, and I'm always writing something or trying to share something neat on the usual internet. And I'm in the process of doing some new writing, and so we'll see what drops next on the Occult Research Institute website, right? If I get that right.
Yes.
I always mess it up. I got a cool little idea. Combining East and West is something I like to do. So honored to be here.
Awesome. No, thank you. Always happy to have you on, Ethan, for real. And then the OG himself, Robbie Marks. Marks, what is up, my man? How are you? And let everybody know where they can find your stuff, please.
Yeah, I've just been staying busy doing art and on a bunch of podcasts lately. If anybody wants to check either my art or my podcast, the MetaMindcast, out, you can go to my Linktree, which is Linktree RMARX, Linktree R Marks, and that'll pull up everything I got.
Oh yeah! If this is the first time you're listening and it's the first time you hear Robbie Marks, if you want to hear all the other work that he has done on the Occult Rejects, instead of flipping through hundreds of episodes on the Occult Rejects, go to his podcast and check out all the amazing shows he's done for us. Definitely fire. Story time with Robbie Marks. Thank you, Robbie, for coming on, my man. Always love having you on. You know, one of the people from the beginning, man. You know, and I still appreciate that you're still here. So yeah, we definitely are. We definitely are. So now finally back to Absidarian. Absidarian, I don't know if you got anything that you want to plug, if you got any sites or anything. Do you want to plug anything?
Sure. Peace, everyone. First off, thanks for having me back on. Looking forward to a good show today.
Oh, yeah.
You can find my work on my Linktree Absidarian. Do tons of esoteric research. Right now on our Patreon, we're checking out Esoteric Greenland with all the Greenland talk. So we've been exploring Arctic expeditions in occult history, so from John D. Mercator to Casanova's private letters, etc. We're having fun uncovering some new things in occult history. We've been doing the Trump and the JFK Code series. We predicted earlier the assassination connections, and so if you want to check out some of the cool esoteric research and occult history, check out our Linktree, and you'll find all the information there.
Awesome. That's what's up. Thank you very much. I might have to go check out that Trump stuff myself. Very interesting. So Absidarian, we got Rudolf Steiner today. I guess for you, and then I'll ask Robbie, what was it that he got you into him to where you actually have enough to talk about the guy for a while?
Yeah, sure. So when was it? Around 2010, so around 15 years ago, I was researching Atlantis, Lemuria, and antediluvian civilizations before the flood, and with that myth, and I came across, Rudolf Steiner's work in that area. With I started reading Cosmic Memory, so that's one of the earliest books I read from him, and I was just really impressed with the esoteric insights he was presenting. And then I read How to Gain Knowledge of the Higher Worlds and How to Attain Them. That was a great book on knowledge of self. So it was a great introduction to this master teacher in spirit science. And man, he has such a breadth of work out there. Archive.org. That's his main website. You'll find all his lectures there, all the books there for free. So it's a good resource. So I spent a lot of time, researching his work and lectures, and I was just really impressed by what he accomplished and just what I learned from his teachings. So yeah, there's a lot to cover with, his history, his teachings, his legacy.
Yes.
He has his hands in just so much, from Waldorf education to biodynamics in agriculture. He has anthroposophy, his school, and eurythmy, which is like, movement and dance. So he's just involved with so many different areas.
Yeah, no, that's from what I've heard, and there's stuff Robbie told me that I didn't even know about the guy, that I was like, oh damn, this is going to get interesting.
Just going through the various histories and looking at different occult philosophy, you will see Rudolf Steiner's name pop up frequently. And then I was talking to my brother, and this had to be 25 or more years ago, and he was into agriculture and actually working for a agency that was helping farmers get away from big agriculture chemicals. And basically he was into Steiner because of the agricultural aspect of it. And it and then you hear about the Waldorf schools as far as an education and how children grow, and then in every city across the country you'll also find like a Christian Science. They call them Christian Science reading rooms. And Rudolf Steiner was big into Christian Science and basically taking the mysteries of the Catholic Church and peeling back the layers and revealing kind of the deeper mysteries of these things. And so just through the natural course of friends, family, my wife's in education, so Steiner and the Waldorf schools was often a topic of discussion. And just, and after you hear the name so many times, I just dove in and have gone through, and probably some of the works that have stood out most to me that he's done. It's a book called Nature, an Open Secret, where he talks about Goethe or Goethe and basically how he inflects his overall view. And I think Goethe really had a fundamental effect on Steiner and his outlook and the way he looked at the world. But it's just, what's another good one? The Mystery of Golgotha, which is about basically, where Christ was crucified on the skull and it relating to Adam, basically that being the burying place of Adam, the original patriarch. So it's just, within occult philosophy, he gets into mysticism, spiritual, and he created what he called anthroposophy. And that he's basically trying to take the science and spirituality and merge them together. So it's kind of, from a worldview, it's just something that's kind of just fallen in a lot of the stuff that I've been looking at over the years.
My opinion, when you start adding occultism, or I don't know if you want to call it spirituality, and science, or kind of like physiology, my opinion really will start to make some breakthroughs in understanding. That's just my opinion. So it's nice to hear other people are trying to do that. But
go ahead.
Well,
I was just going to say, I was just re-listening to Nature and Open Secret, and he goes into depth about Goethe and his understanding of the eye and how light works within the eye and how it gives us there's a whole section on the eye and how the eye works, which made me think of you while I was going through that.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Nice. All right. So, Absidarian, I guess, I don't know if you want to start us off here and kind of like.
Sure.
Where
I'll just
you go
connect what Rob mentioned about Goethe and saying that his early career was he spent a lot of time just I don't know if it was, I can't remember off the top of my head if it was not translating. He was basically examining Goethe's work in his early publications and career, and that had a profound influence on his work. So where do we begin with Steiner? That's interesting. Well, his teachings, he's very Christ-centered. To touch on Rob's point, the mystery of Golgotha to him was the central point of human history, and he talks about that a lot throughout his lectures. He talks about in his teachings. He talks about the Christ impulse, which is the center between the two poles of Ahriman and Lucifer. So these are two spiritual forces that, in his teachings, it helps with humanity's evolution. It helps mold you, and he says the solution is the Christ impulse in the center. So he was very Christ-centered, and that was one of the main reasons he left Theosophy. If you know his history with Blavatsky's group. They were just following basically Indian teachings, and Rudolf Steiner felt that the European culture and civilization, they had the Western mystery science and they had their own teachings, and he followed very Christ-centered teachings, and was not compatible with how they were trying to prop up Jiddu Krishnamurti to be the next world teacher. So they had some disagreements. And then he left Theosophy and started Anthroposophy, which the key in there is Sophia, that's divine wisdom, reinterpreted for the human perspective, right? Anthroposophy. So that was really key in his teachings. Just bringing that back. One core highlight is I see a theme throughout his work is a redemption of thinking. He talks about this a lot, especially with his world history lectures. And when he talks about like the evolution of thinking, clarity of thinking, and developing natural clairvoyance with these methods. So he connects these threads throughout the world history lectures of his. And, if you know a little background on the incarnation cycles, there's a lot of talk with Steiner students about basically a 6-tiered incarnational cycle with Rudolf Steiner, which started with Gilgamesh and Eabani, with the Gilgamesh mysteries, and then you're following up with in Ephesus with Cratylus and Misa, then Aristotle and Alexander, and then Thomas Aquinas and Reginald of Pipernino, and Rudolf Steiner and Ida Wegman. Ida Wegman is basically his doctor. So there's karmic cycles in Steiner's tradition, which he alludes to in his world history lectures. When you get a sense that he's talking from a personal level when he's talking about like some of these characters like Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, what they contributed to the development of thinking. But again, just to reiterate from the last podcast, Steiner never claimed to be, I was the incarnation of Aristotle or Thomas Aquinas or Eabani. This is basically, this is coming from a lot of Steiner students. So it's just theories, but it lends an interesting perspective on the overall scope of his work with this knowledge.
Real quick, you mentioned Thomas Aquinas. And I have mentioned him before with Albertus Magnus. He was the guy who broke his supposed droid. I did not. I mean, I knew he was like involved with the church. Obviously, I think he's a saint, isn't he? Actually,
yes, he's a Christian saint. And
I was watching this. I forgot this guy's name. This guy Taylor something Marshall, because he was covering the Gala Mafia, and I watched some of his stuff to try to get some notes on it, or at least places to go to look for more stuff. And he had mentioned something about Thomas Aquinas. Now this guy's like an actual, I don't know, whatever. He's been to the Vatican and stuff, and he said like literally over there, like sometimes if there's things that they're trying to resolve, they will actually refer back to him a lot. Like they even joke around. Instead of what would Jesus do, they say what would Thomas Aquinas do. Like that's literally a joke, like within the Vatican and within the Catholic Church, that they actually look to that guy that much on how to handle the church. And I had no idea. No idea. I find that very interesting.
I was pretty amazed when I learned about him too. He was a very influential, Christian philosopher basically, but he did a lot for the school of thought and reason. He's a big fan of Aristotle. So going back to the Steiner tradition of the redemption of thinking, Thomas of Aquinas plays a part in that, in the evolution. And, he's building upon the teachings of Aristotle that's not too widely known in the world as well. Yeah. So it's really interesting when Steiner talks about Thomas Aquinas talking about Aristotle. So he's basically in his lectures, he has commentaries of commentaries, if that makes sense. And, on the side note, if you know a little detail about the incarnations, it adds a very interesting detail. Maybe this guy knows what he's talking about. When he talks about, what was going on with Thomas Aquinas, Aristotle during those times. He's a great source of knowledge, how things were during those times.
Well, it's interesting how you was even saying that he refers to them. My opinion, and I do think I think Crowley was big on this. Unless you kind of know, if you were to listen to the Gnostic saints that he mentions, that gets mentioned in the Gnostic Mass, that right there should probably tell you should go look into what these people were doing. Maybe in my opinion, you might learn something from them. But my opinion, besides, and then books that he would suggest to read if you wanted to get into the Astrum Argentum. But in my opinion, I don't think he was really all that big and open with coming out and suggesting a lot of other people to look into. And I think part of the reason why he didn't do that, was because he was ripping them off as well. In a way, he was kind of stealing their shit, since nobody, people, just like you mentioned before, people stopped reading. They really weren't reading. Probably, I'm sure there was people out there who were very ignorant to this stuff and had no idea what was what. And so when they came across his stuff, they had no idea that something 200 years ago was saying the same thing or looks like the same art but just changed a little bit. And I do think he did that a lot. So it's nice to hear that other occultists will refer to the person that they got their ideas from instead of trying to claim it to be their own. You know what I'm saying?
Very good.
Yeah,
point.
I think that happens a lot. I think Crowley was huge on that. That's just my opinion. There was something you mentioned before, too. He left Theosophy. That's interesting. I mean, there wasn't much about the guy I knew anyway, but I didn't know that. And I just find that, I didn't know. And the only reason I just found out maybe 2 weeks ago that I don't even know how I got to it. Somehow I came across the fact that Aleister Crowley blamed Blavatsky for being Jack the Ripper. And then somehow that stumbled onto specific quotes of him actually shitting on Theosophy. And I was just yo, I didn't know this dude. He said, I wish I had him pulled up on me now, but there was one that basically was you're a retard if you're into Theosophy. He was basically almost trying to be as blatant as that. And it was just funny because I know he had a lot of respect for her and even considered her, I think an 8 = 3 or something great in the Astrum Argentum. Even though she wasn't in it, he considered her at a high degree. But it's funny how I guess something must have been up with that, because then you got Rudolf Steiner bouncing. You got Aleister Crowley even saying this shit's fucking stupid.
So
it's what's up with that?
Well, Madame Blavatsky allegedly was under occult lock, which is, she was under black magic, where her thinking, her stream of consciousness, she would be diluted, if you will, right? So being that she was under a cult lock, her teachings were diluted and distorted. And around 1912, Rudolf Steiner was the leader of the German section of Blavatsky's Theosophy for around 10 years. It was around this time the Theosophists declared the Indian boy Krishnamurti a reincarnation of Christ. But Steiner disagreed with this because he taught that the true nature of the second coming of Christ was his appearance to human beings in the etheric world, meaning not in a physical body. So he spoke more about an etheric reincarnation of Christ. So that's where he had a big disagreement with Theosophy, and he left to create Anthroposophy.
How come you never hear somebody saying, I used to be a garbage man? I'm a reincarnated garbage man. Whenever someone's reincarnated, it's someone famous.
Right. There's no glamour in being, that normal guy that with nothing eventful. So
I always find that interesting.
But I think one of the things we see with Steiner is this idea of this evolving Christ consciousness that people talk a lot about now. Yes. In regard to, like you were saying, how Christ will kind of, evolve etherically into the nature of humanity itself,
That is correct. And one thing I found interesting was he mentioned that in the future, the Christ impulse would grow immensely from Russia. And then, you're looking at what's going on in Russia and like Russian history. They had such a hard, cruel history, right? Last few hundred years. And like how they're kind of stigmatized in Western media, with their, it's very binary, right? It's like 1984 Orwellian ocean world, or, they're enemies, right? So they're demonized, Russia, on the mainstream. And then, and then you look at the spiritual significance of what's underlying there. So that, I always thought that was an interesting connection back to Steiner's teachings.
You know what I wanted to ask you real quick? We're so far away from it already at this point, but it is something like I kind of want maybe to get an understanding for some people, especially myself too. You mentioned Ahriman before, correct?
Yes.
Wasn't he big with that person or that character, whatever?
Yes. All right. So it's important.
I just wanted to get an understanding of who Ahriman is, if you could.
So basically, Ahriman is similar to the Satan archetype, and Ahriman represents materialism gone rampant, and the spirit being neglected. So it's too much materialism, not focusing on anything spiritual of nature. So you look at transhumanism is a good example of Ahrimanic, and then you have the Luciferic impulse, which is too much emphasis on the spirit and not enough on the physical nature. So if you were to correspond it to the energy centers, Ahriman would be like the root. That's
what I was assuming. Yeah,
the root and Malkut, right?
Yeah.
The Malkut region. Lucifer would be the third eye, the light, and then Christ would be the center, Tiferet, the heart. So that's the three impulses, and we learned some very interesting things in his lectures. Some of his lectures, he didn't know they were going to be published, or they weren't meant for the larger public audience as much as how he would tailor his books, meaning they were more for a larger audience. So we learn about, just as there was a Christ incarnation, he mentions a Luciferic incarnation 3,000 years before the Christ, the appearance of Christ with the mystery of Golgotha. And he mentions that Lucifer was born in somewhere around in China, the Chinese region. But he never mentions who this character is. But a lot of researchers, including myself, we think it's the Yellow Emperor. That was a figure in Chinese history that fits the Luciferic impulse or archetype. He shared a lot of science with the civilization, writing, agriculture, the arts, and he was a great ruler. But yeah, and then so back to your question about Ahriman, the other side of that is he mentions that we're due for Ahrimanic incarnation sometime before the third millennium. So between now and the year 3000, we're due for Ahrimanic incarnation, like a great world deceiver, like an antichrist figure to appear. So those are some interesting revelations from some of his lectures.
If transhumanism was a part of that, I don't see it making
Yep.
it to even three.
Oh,
3,000.
Yeah.
You got like what, another fucking 40 years left? We're done.
So I was just wanting to add that when you get into Ahriman and Ahura Mazda, which he uses as a metaphoric kind of example of the darkness and the light, that's traditionally a Zoroastrian belief system that kind of ended up having to go underground and revived later as Mithraism. But the whole thing was Ahura Mazda, when creation was basically coming about, Ahriman was like this unexpected birth of this dark force that just was a natural part of the creation of the light world. So it's kind of, this idea gets into kind of mystic ideas of yin and yang and the darkness and the light and the lightness and the dark. And but it was a metaphor that he would often use within his works to describe things and the way things worked.
I just wanted to jump in and offer like a slightly different understanding of this from maybe more Puranic or tantric perspective. So I think the Ahriman, I actually did an episode on this, like the Ahriman and the outer three. So I have a little bit of a different mapping on the tree. So for me, Ahriman is basically Rahu, and Lucifer is basically Ketu. So Rahu would begin at Netzach or Venus and go over to the moon. That would be the head. Then the tail would be the smoky body, the subtle body. His beginning would be at Hod, and he would eventually aim for Tiferet. However, there's something really interesting is that if you add in the outer three planets to like kind of a tantric mapping, you can say that they have properties, at least Neptune and Uranus, to kind of clear him from the board. So I don't know. I just think that's kind of interesting, like talking about like what is Kether, like the crown, like Uranus has that guillotine, that very headless kind of like, it's a vertical rings. So it looks like kind of as like a guillotine aspect. Pluto has like an inverse ellipsis kind of around the planets, comes under and in. I don't know. There's some kind of like very lock and key about that. So there's this idea that like those, if you assign them to goddesses, you can make a case that they would completely clear Rahu from a negative astrological birth chart.
That's interesting that you even mentioned the way the planet moves. I could be wrong, but I'm almost positive. There is actually a theory out there with the star ruby. At the beginning of it, you will do like sign of silence, but you do it backwards and you throw your hand back. You go like Apapantos Kakadanos. And you go like that, and people have said that they think that Crowley might have actually been like pertaining to like something like out in space and like the trajectory or something. And I was like, oh shit, really?
Well, that I mean, we've talked about this, is that it totally makes sense because the star ruby is like a very secret tantric thing that refers to Vajrayogini, obviously. And when you visualize her, the whole ground is covered in star rubies. That's that's one idea. So I just always found that really fascinating when you would talk about that, because I was like, oh yeah, we have that too.
Yeah, I had somebody tell me that he was almost, the reason I asked is because the only thing I could remember, somebody I think mentioned him on my show like 3 years ago. And I think they said he was kind of like a trickster too, and something to do with tech and transhumanism. I remember them going on about that. But they thought that like, because of the way the world is today with technology, that, he's kind of like the culprit or whatever.
Right. I've heard that whole line of thinking as well.
Yeah.
I sometimes think that Ketu or Lucifer is kind of the software, and Rahu is kind of the physical body, like he is the black cube. And then like everything that's in it that has like no body, no form, that's the subtle body, right? So that's kind of the magical element. Like Rahu is the spiritual technology of our phones, computers, etc. And then Ketu is like the stuff we can't see, the ones and zeros, but it all kind of like makes sense in our eyes, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Ethan. Did you have any thoughts on Ahriman at all? Not to put you on the spot or anything.
No, I had a series, little idea of series of thoughts, but not related to him.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
I can wait. I can do an hour later.
No, do it now. What were you thinking about, sir?
Okay. Well, one of the things that he taught, I think, is neat when related to other teachers of one of his time, and others, I think, that he kind of was alluding to. And let's see here. Got some simple ways to put it. I'm obsessed with the 4 archetypes or 4 traits, and he in his school put forth this idea. He talks about the body being composed of 4 aspects: the physical, the etheric, the astral, and the ego. And these kind of being, consciousness traits that we all have and depict in one way or another. And I thought, when in correspondence with Gurdjieff's teachings, for one, it's neat to look at, and he talked about the 4th way, where there was the fakir, the monk, and the what's the 4th, and the yogi, and these being 3 kind of modalities for transcendent human and transformed human, but not in a negative light, which was warned about, right? The kind of developed person. And the Gurdjieff and Steiner, I believe, did meet. I don't think they were friends necessarily, but I believe they did meet. And Gurdjieff put forth the combination of the 3 being not labeled, but when it was labeled, it was the sly man, which, I mean, it is much more intellectual than this, but it's kind of like the Sigma, right? It's like the outsider that does his own thing, that is compatible in and competitive with all the other concepts. A little quote from Steiner wrote quite a bit on the 4th fold man. In this description, we shall take man as our point of departure. As he lives on earth, man at present consists of the physical body, the ether or life body, the astral body, and the I. This 4-fold human nature has in itself the dispositions for a higher development. So really the core of what he was hoping to inspire was self-development. And Schopenhauer, from an earlier time period, put forth the same kind of conclusion, and certainly directly inspired by Hinduism and other teachings, of course. And he put forth there are 4 classes of human reasoning, and that being becoming, knowing, being, and willing. And so I thought those sets of 4 were a neat way to kind of look at one of the fundamentals of Steiner's teachings in relation to other teachings, but certainly Steiner was much less obsessed with four than I am, and his teachings go well beyond that little idea of his. But I thought it was neat. And there's one little quote that I believe he used frequently, but at least was quoted in writings of his speaking engagements and so forth. The word becomes flesh, and the flesh becomes spirit. So I thought that was just a beautiful polarity there.
I do like that.
Yeah, that's great. I'd like to add to that with the four, the significance of four in Steiner's cosmology. Yeah, we're definitely on the fourth stage of seven. So he has a sevenfold cosmology of humans' development, and he ties it with seven planets, which ties, and I'll talk about the four in a second, but it starts with Saturn, then Sun, Moon. Now we're on the fourth, which is Earth. The fifth is Jupiter. The sixth is Venus, and the seventh is Vulcan. And yeah, it does have to do with the development of different bodies. So with old Saturn, it was the mineral kingdom, so it developed the physical body. Old Sun, it was plant kingdom, it developed etheric body. On Old Moon, it was the astral body, and it developed with the animal kingdom. And now on the fourth stage with Earth, we're developing the ego, or the I. And it's funny how a lot of people in the New Age, they say kill your ego, or things like that, when your ego, a transmuted ego is your best friend if you do your shadow work. So it's really funny how it's spiritual bypassing, with some of these teachings. But so the fourfold nature of man, we could talk about the Kabbalistic correspondence in Steiner's teachings with the four stages: Saturn, Sun, Moon, and Earth. It's Atzilut, which is old Saturn; Bria, which is old Sun; Yetzeria is the old Moon; and Asiya is Earth. So that's the fourfold correspondence related to Steiner's work. So we're currently...
I haven't heard somebody mention that in a while.
Yeah, I got that from...
No, I'm just saying, even though that stuff from the Kabbalah.
Oh, yeah, that's not really spoken about.
Yeah, well...
That was from a Steiner student, from Giorgio, I think his name was. Yeah, Giorgio.
Like, you'd actually be reading books on the Kabbalah to know those words exist.
Yeah, it's definitely a esoteric subject, not spoken about.
Every sphere is broken down like that. With Hermetic Kabbalah, if you look at it that way, that's like, kind of like God, and like what, you have God, archangels, then like kind of like maybe like other gods, and then something else. I'm fucking it up, but yeah, there is a way to like kind of break it down into fours too.
The hierarchy.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
The emanations of the world.
It's also interesting. Sorry about that.
No, go ahead. I'm just done.
I just want to say that, yeah, obviously it's Yahweh Vave. And but then there's an interesting kind of like maybe disagreement. I'm like competing theories of magic. Like, what is it, the 5-word name or is it the 4-word name? I think that you see this a lot in like looking at it from a dharmic perspective. Like, different texts prefer different sort of configurations, and you have to be able to adapt and discard sort of what you had learned before, and then be able to, okay, I can take on this whole new ontology, this whole new way of looking at why the world is the way it is. So I think that's really fascinating.
Well, even Yadhe Vadhe can be spelt and said so many different ways, kind of.
That's right.
That even can start getting like mind fucked and argumentative.
72 names of God.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that when there's 4, it's stationary and grounded, and the 5th activates and moves. When there's a 4 and a 5th, like with mantra repetition, I believe it's the Shri in certain in Om Mani Padme Hum 3, right? With Om Mani Padme Hum, well, there's 4 words there, different number of vowels, but and the Shri, I believe, is the activator. So whenever I see Jin, to your point, that there's 4 and then maybe a 5th sometimes, and what is that? And is it? I think there's something to that. With
Yeah,
that,
the 5th
idea.
in the Western tradition is Shin, the letter Shin, the fire element, which is to the Shakti or the Sekhmet correspondence of the the East. So there's definitely something to the fourfold nature of letter mysticism or geometry. And then when you add the 5th element, the ether or the Shin for the Yadhe Vave, or the Shakti or the I think it was, you said Shri for the Om Mane Padme Shri. You said it was Shri. Yeah.
Yes, Shri. It's right there phonetically with all those. Yeah.
So similar phonetics and sounds right there.
Very interesting.
I think it's interesting that you related consciousness to like Gevura or fire, and there's that idea that the older name for Hesed is Gedula. So you have Gedula and Gevura. So both of them are sort of places for destruction and fire, but the fire of Gedula is actually like what we would call Vajra or lightning, because that's really where the polarity is. It's like the relationship between the two bodies of water, the supernal ocean and the lower ocean. So there's some kind of like kinetic force that happens, and then the lightning starts, I guess. But then you're standing you're standing in the pole. So that's kind of the idea in like more of a maybe Puranic or even in tantric ways. Like the 5th element is always consciousness or mind, but what kind of consciousness and what kind of mind? So then you can like add on 6. So 6 would be like a very luciferic consciousness, like you're higher in your consciousness, you're making things, it's very fusion oriented, very synthetic in a way. I don't know. There's something interesting about that too.
Yeah, that reminds me like the Kundalini and in the Jewish tradition, Shekinah, the Sufis, Baraka, the Chinese Taoist, Jing, in India, it's the Kundalini. So like there's the serpent engine energy a little bit.
Yeah, I mean that's like I think there's a interesting thing that speaks to something somebody said before, was that there's like the 3 layers of reality. There's like the inner outer secret. So there's like a cosmological layer, like what is happening in the planets, if the planets are even real, but like whatever is up there. Then there's like the inner layer, which you could just like reduce down to like your biological, your physiological. I think Nick's like, this is what his thing with the eye is. I think that's like one of the more secret meanings. And then I think that there's like this sort of spectral layer, the things that we can't see. That's like the magician's layer. Like it's like that subtle energy, the subtle awareness we'd call in Buddhism. So it's like what is behind the Maya, what is like behind the Mara, like is it the carnal ground, is it the garden? Maybe it's both. Maybe it's both of those things at the same time. And this goes to what Robbie was saying, like the 4 and the 5. Well, 4 and 5 is 9. That's Yesod. So, that's like that's where the foundation is. Like that's it. That is where Malkuth is. That's where we stand, at least in the Sefer Yetzirah, right? So you're kind of like standing on Yesod, looking up at creation. You don't know all the names of it yet, but you're kind of figuring it the fuck out.
Something I want to add. So it was a few minutes back already, but. Just for the listeners too, but I was impressed that you even mentioned it. But I guess I should have known, Jinx. I know you're into the Kabbalah, but you had mentioned before Gedula. You do have Gabora, which could be which is one of the spheres on the tree, and it's Mars, and then you do have Chesed, which could be Jupiter, but it could be used as it could be called Gedula, and even when you do the Kabbalistic cross, when you're doing the power and the glory, you're actually saying Vegabora and Vegadula. So like you are actually using that word for it. So I was just thank you for pointing that out, Jen. I haven't heard that mentioned in a while either.
And also speaking on the planets in regard to the Sephirah, Steiner talks about the development of the planets, how some of the planets came out of other planets. The moon was birthed from the earth. He gets into different planetary consciousnesses, and how specifically with the sun, there's a higher form of sun, almost like well, he says on some levels that Jesus is essentially this incarnation of this higher form of sun being. And there's also a sun in the inverse, a sun sort of demon that resides within, so he gets into these ideas of the energies of these planetary bodies, and how they work, on reality and us as far as the consciousness.
I'll just add one little quick Kabbalistic thing to just play off what Robbie said, because I think it's really interesting, is that I love this quote. This is from my friend Sochki. He taught me about it, so I'm just crediting the source. So Isaiah 46 in the Hebrew Bible. Now, interestingly, talking about Gedula, Sochki is a Hasidic Kabbalist, so he actually prefers the idea of Gedula as Hesed, as being the ocean. So there are different kinds of Kabbalah, and there are different kinds of understanding of what occurs at that Sephirah. So just thought I'd throw that out there. But the rock of Jah is in Hashem. That's the Isaiah 46. So in Kabbalah, that's actually like, it's deep as fuck, because people really believe that's like talking about what Robbie was talking about. It's like the moon being birthed from the earth, very literally. And that's why you often see like the Eastern deities wearing the crescent moon as their crown, especially Shiva, in particular Shiva, because he can take the expression in time. He is the mind that takes the expression in time. Time is really 9. 9 is really what? The moon. Something really interesting there.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something with Shiva. In Rudolf Steiner's lectures, he mentions Shiva being an incarnation of Lucifer in India. And in certain traditions, he's the Adi Yogi, the first yogi. And, he breaks down the symbolism like only Steiner does. Shiva's eyes are half closed, so he's not fully in this realm. He's, a lot of light, the lunar influence he associates with retarding development, so slowing down development, because it's the old moon, the old lunar influence. And, and then, so it's a really interesting connection how he talks about, the Shiva archetype and figure, and he relates it to, the Luciferic current.
I definitely think that there is a truth to that in the Puranas, because, basically what happens is when Shiva becomes Mahakala, so they're not exactly one-to-one the whole time, he abandons creation. He goes to the Mahasmashana. So it's like, it's okay, but that also could be described as God as dying. Even though he's not actually dying, he's going to the place where things die, where everything dies. So that is the Shiva with his eyes closed. He's surrounded by the hosts of the carnal ground. But then when his eyes open, he becomes Bhairava. He becomes like the ferocious one, very, like, maybe you could say like satanic in a way, because he has like a dark blue-black face and fangs, and he's laughing on the carnal ground.
Is that when the eyes are like really open and round?
Yes. So you see this a lot in, great memory, Robbie. So you see that a lot in like Nepal in the Bhairavas. So this really fell out of favor. This is called the 8 movements of time. So this, like, it's a specific grouping of like male deities, and they have 8 movements throughout, you could say, the tree, but they all emanate from Binah or Saturn. That would be kind of the idea. Kala Bhairava, the time king, he manifests these other 8 figures. So they could then, you could say, populate the tree. And they make everything kind of move. That's their whole function, is they're kind of the ones who keep it going. And then the Shakti, or the wife, she's the one who's able to traverse space. So she can actually move through the paths, move through the Sephiras, take different roles in the Leela. Something really interesting about that as well.
Yeah, I would just like to add, since we're talking a little bit about the Shiva symbol, I want to add a little layer to this. There's some schools of thought say the crescent on Shiva's head is more towards Venus, and because it's related to Taurus, the bull, like with Hathor, and the Egyptian tradition, the crescent. It's more related, and the Luciferic mysteries is related to the morning star and Venus as well. So that's a little interesting layer of some of the symbolism.
Well, Durga also slays the buffalo demon. So you'd have like your Hathor, like Venus, Taurus element right there.
Definitely.
So another thing I think is interesting is Rudolf Steiner also wrote a good amount of information on Rosicrucian Christianity. And this, he actually wore it was a round pendant with a cross that has like 3 roses on top and then 4 roses on the bottom of the cross section, almost like the tree of life. But he was very much into Rosicrucianism as well.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I read a book by Rudolf Steiner I recommend if you're interested, and it's called The Secret Stream. So that's basically on the life of Christian Rosenkreuz, basically the CRC tradition. Really interested in esoteric history, what he develops there. So yeah, we could talk about some of his influence. Well, one was Master M, which you mentioned. There's a lot of theories on if that was Alois Mailander. We don't have an established link between the two, but we do have an established link between Mailander's students and Rudolf Steiner in Germany. So what's his name? Friedrich Eckstein, so he was an initiator of Steiner and head of the Vienna branch of the Theosophical Society at the time. And he was a known student of Mailander. But it's also important to mention another figure, J.B. Kernan, which we talked about in another podcast as well. He was a Freemason in the late 1700s. He was a German opera singer, opera director, vocal pedagogue, and Freemason and esoteric writer. So much of Kernan's alphabet mysticism was integrated into eurythmy in anthroposophy, in which is eurythmy is a series of alphabetic figures made with the body, described by Steiner as visible speech. So it's a system of movements and dance. So it's important to mention that figure because Steiner doesn't give any credit to either figures in his work. I guess he's keeping Mailander's identity hidden while he was alive. That was Mailander's wish, but it's kind of weird that he didn't mention J.B. Kernan, even though he plagiarized some stuff of J.B. Kernan without giving full credit. So I always thought that was interesting, but it's important to cite the source or share some background information. So if you're interested in learning more about letter mysticism, I definitely would direct you towards the work of J.B. Kernan. He's definitely an interesting character.
May I ask, did he talk about using dance and movement as a pathway to development?
Rudolf Steiner?
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't know much because this was during his later stages of life.
Mm-hmm.
But let me see. I don't remember off the top of my head. This is not a subject I really went too much into. Like
no, I just heard you mention dance and just was wondering more about that.
But in a nutshell, from what I understand, yes, the dance and movement is supposed to aid in spiritual development because the dance and the mimicry of speech movements. It's your inner expression of your soul. So it is supposed to aid in your spiritual development.
It was. Yeah, well, I was going to say it was almost like a physical mantra.
Yes.
And the exactness of the movements and, the repetition of the function, very much kind of, getting into kind of like the spinning dervishes or, this interpretive kind of dance for, higher forms of thinking. Yeah.
And I was going to say Gurdjieff, who talked about the fourth way, or published the fourth way. He was big into the dance being instigation of consciousness. And as a Tai Chi practitioner, the repetition of movement and, research of, body dynamic and movement, it can really have interesting effects, even though it may not be your intention on as far as consciousness development.
Yeah.
It reminds me of OA type stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna say that as well.
Nice, Robbie. Nice.
That also makes sense. Sorry, Nick, because we have tantric dancing, so which is like subtle body movements during ritual performance. It obviously doesn't look anything like regular dancing. It doesn't even really look like dancing. It's more gestural and hand movements with mudras and implements. And then also I think of like the Balinese dancing, which is directly tied to the Upanishads, to like the Bhagavad Gita, to all that stuff. So each little like micro movement, I guess they would call it, is tied to some part of the actual Leela. So some actual like words, like the words written in text. So that's really interesting as well, I think.
So I think another interesting subject that's not too well known is the circumstances surrounding his death. Was he poisoned? And I have reason, and many other researchers do have reason to believe, yes, he was definitely poisoned. So what we have is the eyewitness account of his wife, Marie Steiner. This comes from a book by Lydia Gentili in her book, A Recollection of Marie Steiner. So based on Marie Steiner's testimony, it was a year before his death during the Christmas conference. I think this is 1922 or 23. And there was a reception, and the Dr. Steiner just burst into the room. He looked around and he said, "We've been poisoned." And then Marie was shocked, and you get to see how good a guy Steiner is in these moments, right? Because he goes, "Did anyone drink anything?" And everyone in the room said no. And then he goes, "So it's only me. That's good." He whispered and staggered into the room. So basically, he was just, concerned about the whole group there. And you see see how genuine he is, and even at these moments. But he wanted it to be kept a secret. He didn't want to stir up any controversy or anything going on, because there was a lot going on in Germany in the early 1920s with the Nazis, and he wasn't too safe with his anthroposophy, so he had to move things around. So it was kept very hush. Not too many people spoke about it, but I always thought that was an interesting little nugget.
And from what I understand, he wasn't keen on the Nazis at all.
No, definitely not.
No. Right.
Definitely not.
So that was amongst his last words was dissent. Did anyone else take it? Did anyone else drink anything?
Oh, I should clarify. He lived 1 year after, but his spirit was weak and broken. But his words,
wow.
That was his words before, when he was trying to figure out what was going on. When he felt weird,
wow.
So he started drinking a lot of milk.
Oh wow!
So even in those
he didn't
moments,
die immediately afterwards, so it was really hard to catch anyone.
He died less than a year later, but he was very weak afterward, because basically, he's very weakened with whatever he was poisoned with, and there's a lot of theories on that as well.
Gosh.
Yeah.
And the theory is too that it was maybe Nazi nationalist German supporters at the time, because that was what, pre-World War II or
pre-World War.
Right.
No, it was right after World War One. Yeah, pre-World War II. So in the early 1920s when they just started getting into power.
Wow.
No,
And Manly P. Hall, it's the story just kind of.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's the
Well,
exact person I was.
Break it down.
Yeah, when I heard, I heard about Manly P. Hall before Rudolf Steiner, and then when I heard about Rudolf Steiner's untimely demise, I said, man, this reminds me just like of Manly P. Hall, and like, man, so tragic. The greats, how, I mean, granted, Manly P. Hall had way much more years to his life than Rudolf Steiner, which was tragically cut pretty short. But just the amount of work that Steiner produced, and even Manly P. Hall as well. What I found interesting about Manly P. Hall was, he produced The Secret Teachings of the Ages in his early 20s.
Right.
And much of his stuff wasn't, we come to learn, much of his stuff wasn't properly vetted, especially with Masonic information and insights. After he was raised, he really wouldn't talk about certain subjects. And he even apologized with some of the errors he made in some of his earlier works at the time. Let's see, what else do we got here? J.B. Kernan.
Jim, did you want to say something? I saw you turn your microphone off.
I just wanted to say that I think it's really interesting that such a great thinker was able to kind of evolve and change his perspective on maybe the esoteric and occultism and some of like his preconceptions, just because he said them in the past. He didn't keep them fixed. He broke those klipas. He said, I'm going to move past them. I'm going to like go forward and like take on this new information instead of staying stuck in the older ways of thinking about it.
Well, and he's got a book called The Esoteric, I think it's called The Esoteric Sciences, where he goes in and talks about the different esoteric schools. And at one point he says, that through the course of this learning, that all of the mystics always come to the same end. He said that some of these esoteric forces are out there specifically to deceive you and derail your studies and your movement. So you have to be, conscious and aware of the whole,
Absolutely. I think that's the biggest trick to all occultism in like my opinion. I don't know if Nick agrees, he can disagree too. But I think that's the thing, is like, even with Crowley, it's like, how much was bullshit, how much was true? Well, it's a lot of both. So if it's all mixed together, that's what makes it really hard to figure out.
Yes, it does.
And that's like with all of them. All the grimoires are like this. It's like, especially when it gets really like autistic and you have to know the numbers and the angle and the degree of this. And then if they can just transpose one digit, right? And it would transform the whole operation.
Right.
So it's like there has to be like that skill of Twilight language to like be able to pick the right things or reassemble it back together.
Right. What was it? Crowley took the order of the tarot deck and moved two of the cards and said that they were, and then later Arthur Edward Waite said that was wrong and switched them back. So it is interesting looking at all the juxtaposition of all these things.
I also think that goes back to the idea of theosophy, like at the very beginning, and like why there was this division between like anthroposophy and theosophy. It very clear to me that theosophy, at least with Jiddu Krishnamurti, became like, it was so syncretic. It was so much of everything. It could never realize itself. That's my conclusion. It was mixing like Maitreya, it was Kumara, it was like a form of Krishna, it was like Christ consciousness, like
Christ consciousness, yep.
Right. And that's the thing, is that those things actually have more specific, maybe more, there's more exact ways to position them on the tree, and they're not all the same. So
Right.
they actually, we would reach different conclusions through the process of getting to that specific one. But names have so much meaning, right? Like it's so, but if you're saying they're all the same name, it doesn't matter. That's going to make it so much more dense going up, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd like to also add, in esoteric work, like to everyone's point, you have to be fluid, and you can't really attach to certain ideas that you, or ideals that you may have before coming into spiritual practice. And I think having grace, humility, daily practice, reverence to your relationship with the divine, God, whatever you call it, and then that leads to revelation. That's the real knowing, the gnosis, in my opinion and experience.
Well, and it's with any of these texts, Manly P. Hall, Rudolf Steiner, as you're going through them and you're taking this information in and understanding it, you're having literal revelations, like in your mind, and juxtaposition and the turning and the interaction between your understanding, and it's a beautiful thing,
Certainly.
I find I was just going to say, on the esoteric understandings that people interested in the occult might find there being paradoxes and contrasts and even things and untruths.
Oh yeah.
That's what happens to an open mind that's studying and a seeker, whereas the exoteric tend to be partisan, and therefore they're just not wrong.
Right.
They're never
Dogmatic.
They're dogmatic, and
Like
their
devil's
godhead
advocate.
is no longer spiritual, but stately
Or fluid in function.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that, fluid and function. That's a good way to put it. Absidarian, do you have anything else that you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, definitely. Jin mentioned Maitreya, so I think this is a good time to just talk a little bit about that. In Rudolf Steiner's work, he talks about three main streams of influence. So one is the Krishna stream with the Bhagavad Gita, and the second was the Buddha stream, and he talks about the Maitreya Buddha being a future full incarnation of the Buddha. And in his work, you gotta take things with a grain of salt. He says that every century or so there's a partial Buddha incarnation on earth, and then just evolving up to this Maitreya full Buddha expansion incarnation. And the third stream is the Christ stream. Those are the three main streams of evolution in that surfaces throughout his work. So that's just the time. The Maitreya Buddha is another interesting incarnation that we're expecting.
Has anyone seen The Boy?
What's that?
There was a straight BBC mainstream short documentary about this young person in Nepal or thereabouts, northern India, and I believe it was simply called The Buddha Boy, and that's what he became to be known as. And he's since had a varied and mixed story, but at the time they recorded him, he meditated for sat there in the same position, recorded for 56 hours. And their computer, their battery fried out before they could continue just observing this really young man meditating in this tree for 50 some hours. It's fascinating. To your point about Maitreya and these Buddha-like beings every once in a while. Wow, this was an amazing story. Worth looking up.
I think one thing about the Maitreya from more traditional perspective that gets lost is that it is really just in your consciousness. It's not a person. It's not a messiah. It's not a. We don't even believe in reincarnation. I know that's so crazy, right? Buddhist doesn't believe in reincarnation. We actually call it rebirth because there's no essential part of you that's fixed. That's how we would describe it.
Right.
I'm not saying the Steiner stuff.
That's so well said. Yeah, that's such a westernized concept to expect him to come for us and save us or whatever. The great build.
No, it's like something that you can forge, maybe that's a good word, or build, or you refine. You know, like people are like stonemasons, for instance. They, refine stone.
Everyone's a Buddha.
That's right. So you have to refine that consciousness in yourself. That's really what the real message is. It's not so much, it's not in the externality, it's in the consciousness.
Right.
Did you guys want to add anything else? Because maybe we could wrap it up here or whatever. Unless somebody else wants to bring up something.
Well, I just think it's really interesting, the idea of taking the esoteric, occult kind of philosophies and incorporating them with science, basically combining religion and science, and trying to peel back the layers of these things. And his body of work is extensive. I mean, you just won't run out of information when you're going through his stuff,
Yeah. Thank you very much, Robbie. And, I'm hoping maybe we can actually continue this talk on him later down the road. Talk about maybe more of his specific stuff,
Right.
if that works out. But yeah, I figured maybe we could wrap it up here instead of trying to pull too much out of you, and maybe just doing another episode on the man, because I know there's plenty of stuff that Robbie and Absidarian probably still haven't talked about that you could talk about. And thank you, Jen, Ethan, and Robbie and Absidarian. Thank you all for coming on and talking about this. Again, for me, like I was telling Ethan, I said I really don't know. Before the show, I said I really don't know shit about the guy, so. Don't feel bad if you ain't got much to add. I was like, because I ain't got nothing. So this was really cool. It was a lot of interesting ideas being tossed around and stuff. So thank you. Real quick, I'll let all of you plug your stuff. We'll go Absidarian real quick, since you were the guest of the hour here. Why don't you let everybody know where they can find all of your stuff again?
Yes. So Linktree, Absidarian. It's basically Absidarian or Absidarian Mott across social media networks. Thanks.
Of course. No, thank you, sir. And Robbie Marks.
You can find all my stuff at my Linktree, which is Linktree RMARX, and that's my artwork, my social media, my MetaMindcast podcast. Everything's there.
Thank you. Ethan Indigo.
Ethan Indigo Smith on all the social media and so forth, and I always appreciate communication and so forth. So, again, honored to be here.
Yeah, no, thank you for showing up. Appreciate it. It's such a short notice, too. And Jin the Ninja.
Thank you so much, Nick, Ethan, Absidarian, and Robbie, of course. Robbie and Nick will be very soon featured on my show doing part 2 of Book of Enoch.
Part 3.
Well, part 2 has to air yet, Robbie.
Oh, yeah. True. Sorry.
Jump with the gun. Awesome.
No, that's okay.
I love it.
So it is a 3-part series.
We did bring it up earlier, so that's probably why,
It was on my mind.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad it is.
And so, so just check me out, Threshold Saints. I'm on all the socials. I have a link tree. I haven't updated it in a long, long time. But yeah, that's a Wukong Reborn, WKONG Reborn on Twitter. That's the best place.
Awesome. Thank you all very much. And I will have all of their links in the bottom. And like I said, I do hope that, probably in the future we will be doing a part 2 to this. And hopefully somebody else, another reject, will be joining us because they couldn't make it tonight. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.